Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? This is my review of The Cold Dish by Craig Johnston. This is the first in the Walt Longmire Mysteries series. I've talked about this series in general, both the books and the TV adaptation that started on cable and I think it finished on Netflix. It ran for 6 seasons. I watched the show first, and before I finished the show, I tried getting into the books, but there were some differences in the way that Walt was written for the novels versus how he was kind of executed in the syndicated version. And I didn't like the way that he was written in the books at first, but I kept wanting to come back to it. And finally, I've just kind of come to appreciate both versions for what they are. And now, with so many stories being written for the novels, I'm way more invested in those. The premise is that he is a small town sheriff in Wyoming. The town is fictional. It's in Absaroka County. The town is Durant. Neither of those are real. And he's a Vietnam War veteran. He's kind of long in the tooth and considering retirement, nearing retirement. And his best friend is a guy named Henry, who is of the Cheyenne Nation. He is also a Vietnam veteran. In fact, Walt and Henry have known each other since they were little kids. They went to college at the same time. They went to war at the same time. They did both of those things for different reasons. And they've just remained friends ever since. And so Walt, being the sheriff in this small town and being very well connected to the area, is just tasked with solving not always murders, but it's usually a murder or a missing persons type case. And in this case, in this inaugural story, the murder that he has to solve is that of a convicted, for the sake of the YouTube algorithm, I'm going to say struggle snuggler. There were 4 boys who were very, very lightly punished, even though they were guilty, for committing S.A. against a young Cheyenne girl. The boys were white, the girl was Cheyenne, and it was especially heinous because she had fetal alcohol syndrome. She was mentally handicapped. And for this kind of thing, you'd figure that justice would call for them getting very, very heavy, lengthy prison sentences, or hopefully worse. But for reasons that I can't exactly remember how they were enumerated in the novel, like the boys got off, and everybody was pissed about it. The white folks in town were pissed. The Cheyenne on the reservation were pissed. And so when one of these boys turns up dead in the beginning of the book, it's not surprising to anybody. And it's not that Walt is necessarily upset that these boys are getting justice dealt to them, we'll say, but he is the sheriff and he's got to set those feelings aside and he's got to enforce the law. He's like, hey, we can't be doing this vigilante thing, because if this starts and doesn't get stopped, it will never stop on its own. And so he's got to round up the other 3 boys. I remember that one of them was named Brian Keller, who is, I've got a friend with that name. He's a former boss of mine, still one of the best bosses I've ever had. And I remember reading that and thinking, like, oh, unfortunate that you got a character named after you and he just happens to be a rapist. But there are a couple of other boys that are in this group. Like I said, there were 4 of them. One of them's dead, and so Walt's got to kind of round up the other 3 and make sure that they don't also end up the same way. But with such a long list of suspects, he's trying to figure out who the shooter is, who the vigilante is, and how to stop him, because, hey, this isn't how we do things. I'm not going to give away the ending. In fact, as I go on reviewing all of these books, I don't want to give away the ending for any of them. But it was a very strong first showing in a series that usually has strong entries in it. I don't think that I've given any book in this series fewer than 3 stars. There were a couple that I felt were just kind of 3-star efforts. Like, I got to the end and was like, oh, that's fine. This just felt like another installment in the series. Here's a bad guy. He's doing a bad thing. Walt's going to stop him. Walt's usually going to push himself to the brink, to the end of his limits, and almost die, and then spend the epilogue recovering, and that's that. There were a couple of books in the early leg of this series that ended that way, but Craig Johnston never like lost his stride, and so even the middling books are still a very entertaining read. I was never bored. It was just I wasn't always like surprised or shocked. And probably in the mid-teens, there were more of those 5-star efforts. There was a protracted arc with a particular villain that Walt went up against, and once that villain was taken care of, I wondered, like, well, what's the next arc going to be? And he's continuing to get better with every one of these books. Craig Johnston has been writing and publishing Longmire for over 20 years now. In fact, there's another book coming out a week from the time of this recording. It'll be out on November 19th. I didn't know about it until just a couple of weeks ago. It's a novella. It's not going to be as long as the other ones, but I've read a couple of the novellas that he's put out for this series and just loved all of them. It seems like he does exceptionally well when he's got a bit of a tighter focus. It makes the stakes a little bit more immediate. It helps with the pacing. And in fact, when we get to Spirit of Steamboat, that's one of my single favorite books in the entire series. It's a Longmire Christmas story, and it's epic. He manages to combine so many great things in it all at once. But The Cold Dish is a very well executed debut novel. The mystery and the whodunit are done well. The setting is just perfect. I've never lived in Wyoming, but I have had to work in Wyoming, both in the summer and in the winter. And I will say that he very accurately gets the winter setting down. Holy cow, like the wind and the cold and the ease with which one can get lost in those mountains is no joke. If I remember right, Craig lives in Ucross, which has, I think this is his Twitter handle, it's UcrossPop25. The population of his town is 25 people. He lives out on a ranch. He's near the Cheyenne Reservation, and he's familiar with law enforcement tactics, but I don't think he himself was ever a law enforcement guy. So him writing Longmire is not a matter of him like writing cases that he actually had to handle as an LEO or anything. He knows the setting, and he talks with a lot of LEOs and gets those details right. And he does have a close friend who is a member of the Cheyenne Nation and serves as the inspiration for the Henry Standing Bear character. And so it helps to add to the authenticity of the world. Not every single book is set in Durant, Wyoming. There's one book where he goes to Mexico. There's one book where he goes to Philadelphia. There are a couple of other, not contrivances, but just mechanisms that he comes up with to occasionally move the story outside of the setting. But the whole conceit of the series is that it is in this setting, this small Mountain West area where they deal with small Mountain West things. Occasionally something bigger will come along, but as Craig Johnston said, it's not about Walt going up against Al Qaeda. It's about Walt dealing with things that a Wyoming sheriff would deal with. I remember that was something that they kind of addressed in the TV show as well, because different organized crime groups were suddenly showing up in Absaroka County, including somebody from Boston. And at one point, like, things just kept getting exceptionally ridiculous, and the Walt Longmire in the TV show is like, what is going on in my town? But that's kind of what TV demands. It ends up saying, like, okay, well, we've got to go even bigger and badder than we did last season. It's like, well, not necessarily. Like, it doesn't have to be a matter of, like, Godzilla stomping Absaroka County. It's just, let's bring in something else that's a little bit more ground level and a little bit more realistic and a little bit more true to the local flavor. There were only a couple of the books that have served as the basis for different episodes in the show. Walt was written differently. Henry was a little bit more true to his character. Like the book version and the show version were a little bit more similar. I think there was a decent amount of overlap with his attractive female deputy in the book and the show, Victoria Moretti. Although I don't think that. So she's blonde in the show. She's played by Katie Sackhoff, and I could have sworn that he said that she had short, dark hair in in the books, but maybe I'm ruined by the fact that I watched the show first and in my head she's blonde. She is younger than he is in the books and in the show. She's close to the age of Walt's daughter. And in the show, Walt's daughter is played by Cassidy Freeman, and she does a really good job with that character. Like the casting in the show is just great. Robert Taylor, who plays Longmire, he still shows up in Wyoming every summer for the Longmire days, and Craig Johnson is friends with him. So like even though the show only lasted for 6 seasons, they're still all in contact because they had a great time making it, and the fans of this series are very loyal. So I'm going to be doing more videos about this, just recapping the individual books without doing spoilers and giving things away, because the mystery is worth following as it unravels, and I want you guys to get a feel for the local flavor of this small town Mountain West area and what kind of stuff could go awry there. It's very clear that Craig Johnson not only loves these characters, but loves the real life setting that he gets to live in and play in as a writer. So I highly encourage you guys to check out the Walt Longmire mysteries, starting with number 1, The Cold Dish. Content warning, there is plenty of, we'll say, crime scene accurate descriptions of sexual assault, and there's gun violence and stuff, and plenty of language up to and including the F-dash word. So caveat lector. Hey, thank you for watching that. Did you know that I'm also an author? You can check the description for a link to my book, Mr. Friday. It's set in a future where Black Friday is militarized and televised, and the best Friday fighters end up getting sponsors and backing, but it just so happens that the very best of them actually wants to take the holiday down. When he's approached by a couple of other like-minded fighters, he jumps at the chance, and it goes haywire from there. This is a short novella, and it's available in ebook format for just 99 cents. Drive safe. See you out there.